Let's open with prayer as people continue to stream in. Lord God, we give you thanks for this day. We are grateful for the one we call Bob Bechtel. It seems really difficult, Lord, to think that he is gone from our midst, and in many respects he may not be. We thank you, O God, for his life, for his memories, for the person that he was, for the faith that he displayed and the love that he showed. We give you thanks for his family and all these friends, old and new, that have come here today to pay tribute to him. We give you thanks, O God, in your name. Amen. Amen. Robert Bernard Bechtel was born to Leonard and Helen Bechtel on October 19, 1932. So what do we say about that? Well, the first thing that Bob would say to me is, Bill, don't say Robert Bernard Bechtel. Just call me Bob. It happened that Bob was born into a long line of Bechtels, going back well over a century in the area of Pottstown, Pennsylvania, where he was born. And so to Bob's two daughters, Amanda and Kara, I will tell you that you have fascinating great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and great-great-great-grandparents, and four greats. I got back to around the late 1700s. All these Bechtels are from this area. This is not a new area to them. Perhaps Bob got his inspiration for writing from his father, who was a printer. Well, the years went by, and Bob married a woman named Beverly, other known as Bev, who would be the love of his life until the day he died. I had the honor of witnessing their love, their kindness, their caring for one another in these last weeks in particular, their nicknames for each other. I got used to that. Their kisses of greeting and departure. It never failed. They would always ask each other how they were doing when Bob was up at Mountain View Rehab Center. It was so touching to watch their tenderness for one another. They sometimes thought alike, and somebody would say something before the other said it. It is rare to see that today, after all those years of marriage, deeper in love than they were when they first met. Well, back to the early days of their marriage, along came Amanda. And then some years later, not a whole lot of time, but some years later, Kara came along. And in time, they would enjoy the love of their granddaughter, Eliana. On January 16 of this year, surrounded by the wonderful love of those who loved Bob most, Bob passed into life eternal. It was an incredible, peaceful passing. I will tell you, I think it was nothing short of a miracle that you, Kara, and Amanda and Eliana got into town on the night before he passed. I think Bob really hung on. At least Beth and I encouraged him to hang on until you guys got in from the airport, and then he died the following morning. There is birth, there is death, and for Bob there was a lot of living in between. The Bob that I knew and worked with was a gentle soul. He spoke softly and he spoke with wisdom. He was ordained as an elder, and as such he will be recognized and remembered in our Southern Arizona Presbytery de Cristo, of which my dear friend John Fife back there, who will be speaking, is a member. Bob served on the Personnel Committee at Trinity. He was chair of the Mission Committee, thoroughly involved in Trinity's long-range planning team, and continued his faithful service with Habitat for Humanity and the Postal Foundation. He invited me regularly to come to the Postal Foundation, and when I did, he made me feel like I was royalty walking through the halls of the Postal Foundation. Bill, you gotta look at this, you gotta see this. Look at these stamps from different countries. How incredible is that? He really got excited about his stamps and his foundation. The Bob that I knew would always be the voice of reason, especially with difficult decisions. Why don't we give this some thought, he would say thoughtfully. Or why don't we figure out what's really going on? There must be some other reason why this is difficult. Or let's try to encourage so-and-so to do better. The Bob that I knew was a man who was given a chance to live a meaningful life by a God of second and third chances. The great soul Mahatma Gandhi said, "Be the change that you want to see in the world. Be the change that you want to see in the world." And Bob did just that. It has been said that if you want to see a miracle, then create one. And Bob took that path. He became a professor, and he strove to find ways to help humanity. So the other day, as I was struggling to figure out what to say about this guy, Bob, I looked at a book that was written in 1997. It incorporated some of Bob's writings. It was called The Handbook of Japan and United States Environment Behavior Research. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Really. Bedtime reading at its finest. But here's some words that he wrote. In future years, environmental psychology theories of privacy, of stress, of wayfinding, of place attachment should play an increasing role in the development of comprehensive health programs. What does this mean, I wondered? The book went on to say that developing community health programs as society began to age, things like physical activity, reduction of stress, altering patterns of violence and crime, all of these and more go toward living a more productive life in community, which then, like a pebble tossed into a lake, creates beautiful formal concentric circles as they move further out, affecting wider circles of people. Here's the bottom line as I read Bob's works in this incredibly stimulating manual. To look for and find ways that create more balance, more harmony between ourselves and our environment, between ourselves and the world around us. But of all the wonderful, caring parts of the Bob I knew, for all the encouragement he gave me, I was stunned and left speechless by his poetry. I have read a lot of poetry. I am familiar with a lot of poets. I'm especially familiar with a lot of America's great poets. His poems, Bob poems, could stand up to any one of those poets. I hope someday I will find them in publication. There are at least 4 large volumes of his poetry, and every one absolute pure delight. His heart was poured out on paper. So the family asked me to read this, one of these poems today. And as I was kind of looking at this ahead of the service, I was listening to the song Edelweiss that came on the little speaker here, and talked about blossom of snow, may you bloom and grow forever. And that's what I think this poem addresses, because Bob, I think, if I have this right, is talking about his dear wife, Bev. It says, the sun is no less shining because of its daily use, nor Are the stars diminished by their nightly circles? And so does my love grow by seeing you every morning. Your face that I will never tire looking at. Your body that I still can't resist touching. The love that grows and branches out, discovering new parts of itself that seemingly came from nowhere. The wonder that is love, the constant discovery that is the loved one, the growing together that suppresses any other human experience. I am filled. It is more than I deserve. Yet it goes on like some force of nature, now that we are a part of each other and can never truly be apart. It is more than just a thing of beauty. It is holy. It is blessed by God. Truly, what is meant by marriage is the creation of a whole new world. Lovely tribute to you, Beth. On October 19, 1932, probably a screaming little baby came out into the world. Robert Bernard Bechtel. It is ironic, then, that the newspaper of Bob's hometown and surrounding area on that very specific day in 1932 printed a story about a heated debate in their town and surrounding area about the Reformed Church. It was a heated debate near Pottstown about whether women should be allowed in the pulpit. The Reverend Dr. Koblenz reported that the Synod's decision was, and I quote, to deny women the right to preach. That was the day Bob was born. A local person said, and I quote, wouldn't women's voices be too weak for preaching anyway? Whereupon, the newspaper said that the conference broke out into a hearty guffaw. Some minutes later, another said, don't you think we would have more laymen here if the ministers talked less? The committee chair, it records, lost no time in saying yes. A pity Bob wasn't grown up enough to have gently informed people that women in the pulpit are actually okay and really are good. I thank God for Bob Bechtel and my memories of him and his family.
This is a lovely hymn that I was not familiar with. It is in praise of the Holy Spirit, and I hope I can do it justice. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. I can feel the mighty power and His grace. I can hear the brush of angels' wings. I see glory on each face. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. I can feel the mighty power and His grace. I can hear the brush of angels' wings. I see glory on each face. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place.
So I read the order of service, and it says words and reflections. So So y'all know what to expect when a member of the Presbyterian clergy is asked to read words. I am not going to read scripture. I instead am going to read the words of a contemporary prophet who was the one who called hundreds of us here in Tucson to a ministry called the Sanctuary Movement back in the early 1980s. And this call is the one that Bob responded to. Because the United States government takes the position that aiding undocumented Salvadoran and Guatemalan refugees in this country is a felony, we have no middle ground between collaboration and resistance. A maze of strategic dead ends can be averted if we face the imperative nature of this choice without attempting to delude ourselves or others. For those of us who would be faithful in our allegiance to the kingdom of God, there is also no way to avoid recognizing that in this case, collaboration with the government is a betrayal of our faith. Even if it is a passive or even loudly protesting collaboration that merely shuts out the undocumented refugee that is at our door. We can take our stand with the oppressed, or we can take our stand with organized oppression. We can serve the kingdom of God, or we can serve the kingdoms of this world, but sometimes we cannot do both. Maybe as the gospel suggests, this choice is perennial and basic, but the presence of undocumented refugees here among us makes the definitive nature of our choice particularly clear and concrete. When the government itself sponsors the crucifixion of entire people and then makes it a felony to shelter those seeking refuge, law-abiding protest merely trains us how to live with atrocity. Jim Corbin. Bob Bechtel showed up one evening at Southside Presbyterian Church in the midst of the usual chaos. 50 to 100 refugees from the death squads and torture chambers and massacres of hundreds of villages in Central America. Families and children and young men and women were sleeping on the floor with makeshift blankets and cots and sleeping bags strewn about. Volunteers from the church were finishing serving dinner. A doctor was treating children in a small Sunday school room. And some of us were sitting down for a meeting of the Tucson Ecumenical Council's Task Force on Central America. It was a typical Monday evening there, and we were anything but a typical group meeting in a Presbyterian church. All those refugees were, according to the United States government, illegals being hunted down. And the North Americans had already announced publicly that they were smuggling refugees across the border to evade capture and deportation to death squads. They called it sanctuary. And these North Americans sitting down to meet in the midst of chaos were just as chaotic and diverse as you could ever imagine. A Quaker rancher, a Catholic priest, a couple of Chicano organizers, a legal secretary, young adult volunteers, a seminary dropout, a couple of goat herders. You get the picture. Bob Bechtel should have fled that chaos for his respectable and professional and wonderful family life. But he stayed long into the night and listened, and then came back the next Monday night, and I don't know, hundreds of other Monday nights over the years to come. And Bob became an essential partner in the work of the sanctuary movement. He was exactly what we needed to sustain the work and the community that formed to do the work of protecting refugee lives under the threat of arrest and imprisonment. We needed a psychologist in our midst.
And you got one.
Bob was clear from the beginning that he was joining us because of his faith. We soon figured out that God had called Bob to the sanctuary movement because of his gifts. Bob was the quiet, listening, observant psychologist in the midst of constant chaos and crisis. We could not have done it without him. Jim Corbett defined the work of sanctuary in these words, quote, individuals can resist injustice, but only in community can we do justice, unquote. Our community was founded in faith and sustained through faith and the faithful ministry of a professor of psychology who never left our side, no matter what. Bob also shared in the risks of the movement. He wrote about one Christmas Eve in 1985, and his account of that trip to bring refugees and reunite them with their families took, I think, 7 pages. I'm going to reduce that considerably. But these are Bob's words about one of his experiences rescuing refugees. It began at 4:30 a.m. on December 24th, 1985, when I got up to drive my Chevy Blazer to Southside Presbyterian Church in South Tucson, where I met with Phil Richardson in his station wagon. Between the two of us, we were to pick up 17 refugees from El Salvador who were being held by the Immigration Service in Las Vegas. We were hoping to have everyone back in Tucson for a Christmas celebration. I could hold as many as 12 of them in my Blazer if they sat on the floor in the back, and I already had sleeping bags spread out there. We had extra water and money in case we ran into trouble, got stuck over the holiday. 2 days earlier, I'd been called by Ken Kennan, a minister, who asked if I would be willing to drive to Las Vegas on Christmas Eve. Of course I would, but my wife and children did not take this news with a great deal of enthusiasm. My wife reminded me that my parents were visiting with us to share Christmas. And my little girl, Kara, said, "But Daddy, I want you to be there to see my happy face on Christmas morning." I could only reply, "But what if there is some other little girl who is in jail and cannot have Christmas at all unless I go get her out?" No reply. I said it was very likely that I would get back in time so that everyone could enjoy Christmas. Well, we arrived at the Federal Building in Las Vegas a little after 12, parking in front of the building, and went inside only to find the doors to the offices locked. We noticed a janitor and asked where everyone was. Well, they went home early because this is Christmas Eve. "Do you know anything about the refugees we're supposed to pick up here?" "Nobody said anything to me," the agent said. Both Phil and I had had previous dealings with the Immigration Service and had come to know that this was a very typical pattern. We called back to Southside, explained our dilemma. By 1:30, we both returned to the Federal Building, had not found any refugees or anyone who'd heard of them. It was discouraging, and I was getting a sickening feeling that all this had been for nothing. We were going to go back empty-handed, and the refugees would spend Christmas locked up in some jail. And then I happened to notice people in the parking lot in the back of the building. I went over to the window. It was them. They were waiting in the parking lot all this time. There they had been clutching garbage bags that held their few possessions, and it had to be our refugees. We rushed outside. Amigos. And we brought the vehicles around to the back parking lot and started loading the refugees. I gave the kids some apples and oranges. There weren't enough. Someone was missing. One of the women's children were still being held in North Las Vegas. Sun had gone down, it was getting cold, kids were starting to pee behind the cars in the parking lot. After a while, even the adults were ducking behind the cars and letting go. I started the Blazer's engine to get the heater going and cycled people through to get them warm. What must have been the last trace of light, a van pulled up in front of the detention center and an immigration officer began unloading another group. "What are you people doing here?" he said. When I explained, he asked us to wait until he had secured the others, and he said he would try to help us. After coming back and hearing our story in more detail, he called the duty officer. There was some muffled conversation. He put the radio down and came out of the van to us. "Look," he said, "if the children can identify her as their mother, we'll release them. After all, I know it's Christmas too." And we stood around the barbed wire gate as the social worker brought out her children. We're not waiting very hopefully. We thought the children would be too young to be able to remember their mother. We needed a Christmas miracle. The little girl was 3, the boy was a little over 1. We waited in fearful silence. "Who is your mother?" the officer asked. Unhesitatingly, the little girl pointed to Martha, and we had our Christmas miracle. "Well, Phil," I said, "are you ready to try for Tucson?" "What time is it?" "It's 9 o'clock at night. We should be able to make it by sunrise." "Look," Phil said, "I'm over 60 years old. This isn't the kind of thing I can do anymore." So Bob replied, "Okay, let's try for Wickenburg, and then if we make it, Phoenix. Let's take it one stage at a time. At each place, we'll stop and discuss whether we can go on." Bob was the psychologist. I got home at 5:30 a.m., just 24 and a half hours after I'd left. I had just crawled into bed when my 2 girls heard me and jumped right into bed with me. Mandy snuggled right next to me, and Kara made a nest of my stomach. I dozed off and so and on throughout that happy day. When I look back at all the Christmases I've had in my life, and those I've had since, it's very clear that this was the best I ever experienced. It was more memorable than anything in my childhood or anything since. I saw Phil many years later and told him how I felt about that day. "Me too," Phil said. "It was the best Christmas of my life." I shall always be grateful to the Hernandez family for letting me share that moment in their lives. They gave more to me that Christmas than I ever did for them. On October of 1986, the entire Hernandez family was granted asylum. In 1997, Hugo was in high school, and I bought him a typewriter. And the next year, he won a scholarship to the University of Arizona. That was how we got our Christmas miracle. Kara remembers Bob taking her to the sanctuary trial for one day, knowing that she was too young to understand the proceedings, but on the way home, Bob passionately pounding on the steering wheel of that old Blazer, declaring, "This is what it means to be a Christian." So I'm privileged today to give thanks for Bob's faithful service to protect the lives of some 13,000 refugees who found sanctuary in Tucson, Arizona, and his faithful service to sustain the faith communities of Tucson, Christian and Jews, who did justice here together for a decade. Well done. Very well done. Good and faithful servant. We couldn't have done it without a professor of psychology to hold us all together. Bob heard the words of Jesus. "I was an alien, and you welcomed me." And he answered the call in faith, and I, in faith, can tell you clearly that one who said, "I was an alien and you welcomed me," has now welcomed Bob Bechtel into eternal peace and rest and life.
Amen. Thank you.
all these ministers. I'm a Methodist. Somebody said the Methodists are the preachers. I don't know, John. I think that was pretty good. There are those of us who have traveled with Bob for 16 years as a part of a journey group. We've gathered in the journey group, and Bob and Bev, almost every month for all of these years, ever since we got together shortly after 9/11. We have loved him and loved Bev with all of our hearts, and we grieve his death, and we feel deeply his absence. But in the midst of all of the hurts, we remember. Remembering doesn't take away the pain, and it doesn't make the hurt go away. But it's in the stories that we tell about Bob that we remember his presence, and it is in the stories that we tell that we're able to move ahead. You see, we remember him as one who brought meaning to our lives and touched us with his honesty and his wisdom. We remember him for his love of nature that he told us about, his commitment to the environment, his appreciation of science, his commitment to people and to social justice. We remember him for his pondering of this limitless universe and the creative power that existed through it all. We remember the stories of the travels around the world and the special relationships he built with people in so many countries. We remember his regard for women and their special place in the world, and how in so many places they ran their communities. And we remember how he cherished the women in his life. Bev and Amanda and Kara and Eliana. We remember Bob as someone who brought us joy and shared his poetry as you have been shared today, that poured forth from his soul with sensitivity and deep thought. We remember him for living a long life, as expressed especially in Matthew 25, and for which he quoted often. Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or sick or in prison and did not take care of you, the alien? And Jesus will answer them, truly I say to you, you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. How many times have we heard that? And we remember how he lived out those words, giving generously to those who lived on the edge of our society. Over these 16 years, we have experienced the fragility of Bob's life and Bob's health. And he openly talked about his dying and his death and how grateful he was for every day of living. And we learn from him about living every day. And no matter how we might have been prepared for his death, because we talked about it, we who had been together in November and had planned to be together in January were not quite prepared. And no matter how many words we have shared through these years, and we have shared many, many words, there are so many things we didn't get to say. Bob, who has been a part of our life, been a part of our days on the earth, no longer walks this earth with us. And life is not the same. And it hurts. It is not the same. but the stories remain. And the remembrances bring memories that can never, ever be taken away. And in that way, and for as long as all of us can tell Bob's stories, Bob is still here with us. And so it is. And so it shall be.
I'm a seminary dropout, so, not quite minister. I'm long-winded, so there's restrooms out that way. There's refreshments available to people if I should carry on too long. I really want to thank everybody for coming today. I want to thank all the doctors and nurses who saved my father's life time and time again throughout the years. I want to thank the makers of equestrian, Coumadin, and Lipitor, who kept him alive. Modern medicine is the reason why my father lived so long, and it is not lost on any of us that without these interventions and life-saving techniques, he would not have seen even his 60th birthday. My father's heart refused to break, as Frank pointed out to me many years ago. Despite all the insults and conditions thrown at it, it refused to die. How do you speak about a man who was larger than life? A man who took you all over the world and who also taught you how to tie your shoes? How does one dissect his life in a careful way as not to miss any part for fear of skipping something vital to the whole? It is a task I will fail at today. There is no possible way to take the whole of him and be able to convey only the integral things. All of him was important and meaningful. All of who he was necessary. To skip something would throw off the calibration. Please forgive me for only discussing the obvious. Words cannot transmit a life. They can only point in a direction. I apologize to Amanda for not being able to say all that she wanted. And believe it or not, you will be thanking me later for not saying all I wanted to. Dad was born on a dining room table, 10 pounds. He was born to a woman with supreme emotional intelligence, yet little education. His mother, Helen, never graduated from high school. His father abandoned him at age 9. From there, his grandfather, a local politician, took over as his father figure. He greatly admired his grandfather and saw him as a role model for what it meant to be a leader and be respected by people in a small American town. He was the first student to graduate with a 4.0 from Susquehanna University, and from there he charged through and got his master's and PhD in environmental psychology from Kansas University in Lawrence, Kansas. While living in Kansas City, he met and married my mom when he was 39 years old. He believed he would never have a child of his own. He loved children, so marrying my mom, who already had a child of her own, was an incredible bonus. In addition, my mother's first husband had 3 children of his own, and they loved my mom so much that even after her divorce, they continued to stay overnight at her house from time to time. So in all, my dad had 4 children before I ever came along. If you're confused about how all this worked, we can draw you a diagram. We had to do it a lot when we were younger. Sister Mary wanted to say that Bob always assured us that we would be a part of his family, and that proved to be true. And still, she explained that we had so little time together because of distance and cost. All I can think of, she said, when it comes to Bob, is the idea of exuberance. And I would agree that's the perfect word. I don't think I've met many people in this world that have such a joy for life and living. It is a challenge to try and live with such a feeling. She told one of the most famous Willis kids stories. These were the Willis kids. Their last name was Willis. He loved nature and he loved birds. And once, during a drive in Shawnee Mission Park in Kansas, he threw the car in reverse, whipped out his binoculars, and exclaimed, "Look, kids, it's the scissor-tail flycatcher!" His exuberance will always come to my mind, Mary said, as the way one should respond to life's treasures. and I started sharing the bird love with all my students while in Africa. It's a great way to honor Bob and keep him alive. Sister Cindy wanted it to be known that PD, was not what they called him, he was Pennsylvania Dutch, so the Willis kids called him PD. He took on ready-made love, and he could spread it around wherever he was. He absorbed the children into his family. He had a significant influence on my life. He provided another layer of life's possibilities, including unforgettable events. You probably don't need to mention the naked sunbathers while we were on one of our hikes. Mary, Cindy, and Frank, we called him Poncho, or just Ponch, these became the first adopted children he brought into the fold of his sphere. There would be many more. He adopted anyone that came over. Most of my sister's friends and my friends became honorary daughters. I had 2 friends who asked if my father could walk them down the aisle when they got married. He often would ask if we had any friends who didn't have a place to go for the holidays. They were more than welcome to come over. It didn't matter who came in that door or who they were. He treated them the same, with the same excitement, respect, and love he would treat his own family. Some things you don't know about him. This gentle talk is not something we're familiar with. Everybody knows what he's talking about. He was very boisterous. He kept a very regimented schedule that would follow us no matter where we were in the world. It drove us all completely crazy. Why did everything have to be so regimented? He answered this question one day to me. He explained that by keeping everything regimented, he could use his mind for different things. He didn't have to think about getting ready, or breakfast, or what the first hour of his day would be like. So it freed up his mind to be able to think of other things, to dream, to ponder, or to think of ideas he might write down to put into a paper or a book. My father believed in thinking time. Amanda remembers his high energy at the beginning of each day, every day, year after year. It never changed. He held that energy throughout the day, having such positivity and focus on things. He was like a force of nature. Nothing could keep him from accomplishing a task. When she was in college, he would take her out to lunch once a week. He never missed out on a chance to smile and be happy with her. His hellos and goodbyes were always full of glee and excitement. He never tired of seeing us, ever. It was always the same happiness. You had to be on guard at all times for an affection assault. You'd be minding your own business, studying away, and he'd come up behind you and seize you for kisses and hugs, and at any moment you could be pounced on with an, "I just love ya," and squeeze and a kiss, and on and on. On any given day, he would stand at the window of the living room and stare out at the mountains. He would often set up the record player and later the cassette player, so he could have a soundtrack to his daydreaming. Many times, this would lead to conducting an orchestra in the living room. The peaks of songs would speak to him. You could see his spirit getting caught up in the emotion. Just as the rising action was building, so my father's joy and inner triumph of life would rise also. And this could just be any random Tuesday. Any given day was magical for my father. Nothing special had to happen. And this idea really comes through in this poem I'm going to read. It's called Learning to Relax. Will you come take a walk with me in the tossing, careless fields of grass, the sun-washed flax and yellow sheaves that make one want to lie down, fall down, and look child eyes at the sky? Will you take my hand, take your leave of careful world, a time-filled place, and feel caresses of the wind and sun, that scoop away concerns and smooth down prickly worries? Sit with me and scan the hills that lead to heaven. Watch the birds make flat, round circles, teasing at the clouds and diving down with glee. Tuck your knees underneath your chin and listen to the larks tell their tales. Keep every sense awake and hear the hum of day. Feel the earth, soft and warm, mattress of life. And if you do this, all this, with me, you will take it back to the place of care and time and keep it with you like a fresh bouquet. Nice. My father could see the molecules that surrounded him. He could grasp the entire universe in one person. He could see the whole of humanity in your eyes. The cosmos was tangible in his outlook on the world. The spectrum of human experience was what he wanted to talk about. You didn't ever have to hide your darkness with Dad. He could handle it. He wanted to hear about it. He loved life. He gobbled it up. He was the embodiment of that quote from Leaves of Grass, "I contain multitudes." When he told his children the story of his life, it was utterly devastating. To think that our father had transgressed so deeply and caused great pain. For myself, it took about 10 years to even believe it had happened. My father had taken a life. This act seemed so counter to who he was. It was so far outside of the scope of the man that I knew. And yet, if you really want to know him, if you even want to try to see beyond the epidermis of his personality, it is a threshold you must cross. To ignore his past, to gloss over it, denies everything that came after. It belittles it by making it look like some stroke of luck or just a fortunate happenstance. It was anything but. To learn that your father served time in a mental institution for the criminally insane is something to absorb. It changes the view of him from being just a jolly, hyper-intellectual lover of life into the understanding that there was quite the price to pay for his self-realization. Despite all the horrors of that place, despite witnessing things none of us could imagine, he found himself. He realized he mattered. All of this questioning about why he did what he did and how to overcome the guilt and shame happened in simple, subtle moments where he realized his usefulness. Those few years were the years that made him. To not acknowledge this would be like taking the paint away from a canvas and still trying to call it a painting. The colors must have a surface to shine on. They have to be held up. They need foundation to measure against. Otherwise, they remain like pools of ideas left in a tube. For my father, the asylum was his place of rebirth. And there he learned one of his greatest lessons he taught us. I'll try to say it like him. And this is literally how he spoke. It doesn't matter where you are, you can find happiness. You don't have to move to the perfect place, have the right job, get the right pay, etc. It all starts right where you are. Nice. I have seen his prison cell. I can't imagine how hard that road to inner peace was. He said to me about his cell, "You realize, kid, I could have spent the rest of my life there, and it would have been okay." How do you create a life that you know will always have a shadow? How do you overcome a crippling sense of shame and guilt to be able to embrace a life and sing again? Most of us would have crumbled under this weight. Most people would have given up and believed they had no chance in the real world. This is what made my dad so special. Despite doing the worst a human could do, as he would say, he knew he could live by appreciating each moment and to devote most of those moments to caring for others. By living fully, he could redeem himself. He was set free. He took advantage of his second chance with great fervor. He went to see Apollo 11 take off for the moon landing. He was at the March on Washington to hear the I Have a Dream speech. He forged a press pass so he could get extra close and take some pictures. He was right up there with Martin Luther King. It's important to go to big events, he taught us. It's important to participate in the here and now with what's going on. If there's an artist you've always wanted to see, if there's a concert you've always wanted to be at, go, participate, do it. You only live once. He told me a story about Napoleon being in the Great Pyramid all alone. The story went that he had a terrifying experience. Napoleon had asked to remain alone in the tomb to have it all for himself. After a few minutes, Napoleon emerged, pale and shaking, looking as if he'd seen death itself. He was terrified to the bone. Legend would write that Napoleon had seen the ghost of the pharaoh. My father, while at the Great Pyramid of Cheops, asked if he might stay alone while everyone left. He wanted to experience what Napoleon had experienced and possibly catch a glimpse of the ghost of the pharaoh. This is so typical of my dramatic father. He told me that as everyone left down the hallways of the tomb, the echoes of their voices grew and grew. Their voices seemed as if they were right next to him. The walls roared and got louder and louder as they left. Dad acknowledged it was truly terrifying, but he emerged satisfied that he had solved one of history's greatest mysteries. Napoleon was afraid of echoes. One of the reasons why he loved his job as an environmental psychologist and as a professor, as a consultant as well, was the opportunities to travel. He went to 52 countries. We're going to stick with 52, I think. We're going between 51 and 52 this week. Whenever he returned home from a trip, he would open his suitcase, and we would jump up and down, eager to see these gifts. Amanda and I were the only ones we knew that had a boomerang and a didgeridoo in their house. We had flutes from Peru and tea service sets from Iran, sandalwood elephants from India, and about 1 million pictures from all the places that he visited. Amanda reminded me that part 2 of the return home trips, would be the slideshow. Mom and Dad would invite some close friends over, we would have dinner, and we would all sit around with the lights out to enjoy the show of travel. The places of the world would light up our eyes, and he fed our minds with history, experience, and stories. This was how we learned about the world. Our house was a National Geographic magazine. I'm not even describing all the people from all over the world who came to visit. The trips where he got to take Mom or all of us were very special to him. He would look at our faces to etch our happiness into his brain. He loved being with all of his ladies. He loved his daughters, but he worshipped Mom. He more than adored her. He believed she was a heavenly creature who rescued him. He never stopped talking about her. She was the greatest thing to ever happen to his life. And he said this over and over and over again. She was his schnebby. He was her schneb. Or vice versa. Or schnebchen, depending on the day. I was Squuzzy. Amanda was Ponda, or Pondominia. But she started out as Litorlis Galorlis. Somewhere in junior high, I became Shnushny, or just Shnush, or Shnushny Dushny Kushny Lushny. When we went to Russia, Squuzzy became Skvashna. And on it went. And then we had a new one altogether with Eliana, who was the Duffer Wuffer. We were the house of many nicknames. I don't think he ever called me Kara except when we were at appointments. His girls built his love for women. He truly enjoyed being around women. He wanted to hear them talk and laugh. He enjoyed the way that they would engage and show their emotions. My sister and I brought him plenty of emotions to deal with. His second big lesson he taught was that it was possible to have 2 emotions at the same time. No, let me do that. You realize, Squuz, it is possible to have 2 emotions at the same time. That's how he said it. Never believe you have to choose one over the other or think that one is good and the other is bad. Things are complex. Opposing feelings can coexist. Don't cheat yourself out of the layers and nuances of life. Don't try to change an emotion just to make it simpler. He wanted us to embrace our complexity and not try to narrow down our experience. He made very sure to tell us that no matter what happened or what we were feeling, we could tell him and he would help without any questions asked. He loved nothing more than rescuing his daughters. For all of his grandiosity and bigness, for all of his booming and storming through the house, his squeeze the life out of you hugs and his gigantic smiles, there was a definite simplicity to him. Something that would happen at the conclusion of moments or after the peak of some experience, or more than likely on the way home from somewhere. He would pat you on the leg, look appreciatingly at you and say, I just love you. That was it for him. That's what he ended almost every other thought with. For a man who sang Nessun Dorma on the way to get the mail, you might think his dramatic way of experiencing the world would follow him into the major questions of life. But even thinking about death brought its own seemingly contradictory simplicity. This is a poem he wrote in 1978. I read it when I lived in New York City back in the 90s, and I said, "Dad, I'm going to read this at your funeral." And he said, "You got it." It's called He Thought He Had Me There. And now, sir, with a slightly malicious slur, the interviewer thrusts the microphone and says, "Your life in just 3 words." I do not hesitate. I slam 3 words back at where he stood. It was good. Oh, it was good. That is my life, my praise, my most important phrase. It was good. That is my sum, my joy, my constant beating drum. Oh, it was good. My loves, my sorrows, sins, my defeats, and all my wins. It was good. And in age, reduced to just a boy, I die with a shout of joy that it was good. And there upon my tombstone, let this my message be to life. For what I stood, yes, yes, oh yes, it was good. He could easily distill down to the simplest of terms and notions. Good was all it was, and that was perfect. I found a poem about 2 hours after he had passed that explained what he would be saying to me as I held his hand while he died. Who knew I would even be there? Who knew I would even be holding his hand? And how would he know that I wanted a last word? In this poem, his last word is yes. Good and yes. Pretty simple for a man who showed us the world. After all the extravagant hotels and expensive dinners, after the trips and museums, he would bring it all back to the most overused and underrated philosophies of living. What was Bob Bechtel's greatest teaching? What is the thing he would want you to know most of all? Just love each other. It's that simple. He loved to just sit and watch us being us. He just loved to sit and love. It was a verb. He would say almost daily, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to be anything specific. You just need to be there, and I love you. This is captured quite perfectly in a poem called The Christmas Visit, which Amanda wanted me to read. The children came back to the western nest with their Eastern clothes, their makeup, and their grown-up ways. There was a flurry of shopping, presents, greetings of friends and parties. But one day, after dinner, we were sitting in the living room, the warm sun streaming in the windows, one reading, the other listening to music, someone sleeping. No need for a single word. We were together again, like it would always be in our dreams. The permanent state we could always return to, the stable platform from which we launched our lives. Good. Yes. Love. When he died, there was this same simplicity. No horns, no band to play him out, I'm sure to his disappointment. The heavens did not open up. I did not see a glow of light exiting his heart as I thought I might. His last exhale was just that. One last giving. And that was it. Incredible peace. He remained true to what really mattered all the way until his last breath. Love. It might sound trivial and trite, even cheesy to some, but when you look at the scope of his life, the arc, the seemingly impossible trajectory that he carved, love has to stand for something extraordinary. It isn't enough to kinda like, or sort of enjoy, or perhaps be keen to. No, it's love. That is it. And that is all and everything. He was the best father a girl could ever have. And it's in the simplicity that I live and breathe my principles. But in the dance of life, it is all of that exuberance, all of the world that he showed me. I'm so appreciative. And I'm so appreciative for you to have known him. Please take some of that with you in the rest of your life. And please tell your children your story. It's the most important thing you can do. It will humanize the two of you together. And that's it. Thank you. There's a small change in the order of service. We needed to insert Uncle John. He had to be here. My mom wanted one of Dad's more humorous poems to be read so you could get a better scope of how kind of ridiculous he was at times. And Uncle John gladly accepted this honor. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Karen. I certainly can't follow that. So please bear with me. I am Bev's brother, John Smith, and I want to say greetings to Amanda, Kara, and Eliana, for they are my nieces, and I am her, Eliana's great uncle. Before I start this poem, and it's a privilege to be here with all of you, and I know you feel the same way. I want to give you 4 words that I thought of as I reflected on my memories of Bob. The first word is remarkable. The second word is curious. And the third word is Renaissance man.
Yes.
So this poem is called Zork Will Zap You. It was written in Brazil in June of 1995. This is Zork. He's from the planet Streichly. I realize he'll take some getting used to. The one eye, the ragged claws, the smell. But he's got a good heart, and he means us well. Besides, if you don't smile soon, he'll zap you. That's what they do on Streichly. Everyone smiles, or else. Zork has a lot to say without speaking. Streichly speaking, that is. It may be science fiction.
So Kara, thank you for bringing your father to life in this tribute today. You really nailed it to the rafters, and I think I've decided why Bob was so gentle at church, is because he exhausted himself. And I want to tell you, your imitation of your father, oh my goodness, I really almost saw Bob up here. That's exactly what he sounded like. You really have, I mean, you've got that whole inflection down. What a wonderful, sweet, accomplished, enjoyable man. I really like the term you used when you said Renaissance man. He was indeed that. So Bev, you were and are blessed to have shared your life with one of God's fascinating children. And he was beyond blessed to have had you in his life, and he knew it. And he knew the love he had for the two of you, the three of you, and that you had for him. I will never, this tribute today that Kara did, that's the kind of stuff that really brought Bob to life in this hour for me. In Matthew 25, and you've heard this between John and Frank today, Matthew 25, you got to get in there a little ways because it's kind of strange in the first section of it. But the last part in 34, verse 35, talks about when you were hungry, you fed me. When you were naked, you clothed me. When you were in prison, you visited me. So now go and do likewise. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you.
Amen.
Love one another as you would be loved. There is a great God out there. I was exhausted hearing about Bob at home. Ah, goodness. I experienced a little of that, not a lot that you guys did. For me, this picture of Bob, I don't know if you can see it. He's got a little smile on his face. He's got that plaid shirt. Bob was a devotee of plaid shirts. And this smile. It's kind of a humorous smile. The dry wit is behind that smile. And I'm really glad we got a chance to glimpse at Bob in so many different ways today through the sanctuary movement. Frank through, where is Frank? She's sitting right in front of me. Through your words and reflections on Bob, each was such a wonderful phase of Bob's life. So now we conclude this service, we finish this service, but we are far from finished with Bob's life. I know for me today, I'm going to carry out Kara's impression and interpretation of her father. I'm going to remember that. That's the kind of stuff that keeps memories alive. So let us pray. And now may God bless you, the family, you, his friends. And may the joy of heaven attend Bob with all the saints in light. Go now in love and peace that passes all understanding. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and to be gracious to each and every one of you, now and forevermore. Amen. Amen. Thank you all for being here. There are refreshments at the back. There's a lot of room to mingle around in here. I see that there's probably a few square inches right up here in the middle aisle. Enjoy yourselves.